Okay, so we're going to start with the courts and what they do, all right? And we'll start talking about Utah courts. And we're not going to talk about Utah courts for very long because, frankly, they just don't handle the same kind of cases that the United States Supreme Court does, which are a little bit more interesting. So I just kind of want to go through a quick rundown of the different courts in Utah and what they do. Who remembers what kind of court I am in? What kind of court am I a judge in? It's one of these. Justice, that's right. So I'm a justice court judge, okay? So the cases that I handle, I think there's a little laser pointer here. Yeah, so these are the cases that I handle, okay? Class B and C misdemeanors. Can anybody give me an example of a Class B or C misdemeanor in Utah? Do you know what that means? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like what? Yep, that's right. That's exactly right. Like stealing candy or something, shoplifting. So if you steal something, and in Utah it has to be under $150. So if you steal under $150 worth of something from a store, that's a Class B misdemeanor, okay? And you can go to jail for up to 6 months for that. Secret, I never send anybody to jail for stealing stuff, but I mean sometimes it does happen. If you get in trouble over and over and over and over again for a misdemeanor, it's way more likely that you're going to end up in jail at some point down the road, okay? But just so you guys know, I mean, and it might happen to you. You might do something stupid one day and steal something from a store and get arrested. And if you do that and you end up in court, the chances are very, very high that if it's your first offense, you're not going to go to jail. You might have to pay a little fine. You might be able to plead guilty and then end up keeping it off your record. If you do what you're supposed to do through the court, it might end up getting dismissed and it'll never be on your record. So you guys need to know that if you do commit these kinds of offenses and you end up in justice court, that the first and second time, maybe it's not going to be such a big deal, but if it keeps going on and on and on, you could get put in jail, okay? We also deal with traffic infractions, and then small claims is where you sue somebody for a certain amount of money. If it's less than $11,000 that you're asking for, then that ends up in my court. If it's more than $11,000, then it ends up in the next court up, which is a district court. Who knows where the district court is in Salt Lake City? Does anybody know that? In Salt Lake County?
Murray.
Nope, not in Murray. What? Yeah, it's downtown. Mm-hmm. Yep, it's that big building downtown on State Street in between 4th and 5th South with the big dome on the top. Do you guys know where the clock tower is downtown?
Yes.
The old city county building? It's right across the road from there. It's that big white building with the dome on top. That is our district court in Salt Lake County, okay? They handle at the district court level the most serious misdemeanors, so Class A misdemeanors where you could go to jail for an entire year, and all felony cases. So the felonies are the really serious criminal cases. What's an example of a felony? What'd you say? What'd you say? I heard it. What'd you say? Yeah, stealing a car. That's exactly right. Stealing a car is a Class 2 felony in the state of Utah. So you can go to prison, not just the county jail. You can go to the state prison for that for a really long time. Okay? So those are the kinds of cases that the district court handles. They also do up there all of like the divorce cases and child custody battles that are going on. And like I said, they do lawsuits over $11,000. So if a case, if somebody goes to court in district court, and say that they go to court and they're found guilty of stealing a car. So they have a trial, they're found guilty of stealing a car, but they think that something happened during that trial that shouldn't have happened. You know, maybe a lawyer said something to one of the jurors that he shouldn't have said, or there was something going on behind the scenes. So what they can do then is that they can file an appeal in that case. What an appeal is where you file paperwork with the next highest court up and say, hey, something went wrong down here, and I want you guys to look at it and fix it. So that's what the appellate court is, all right? If there's an appeal from the district court, it goes to the appellate court, and they look at everything that happened in the trial in the district court, and they decide if that person's going to get a new trial or not, if they're going to start over and get another shot at it. So if the guy in the stolen car case made a confession to the police, but the police beat him during his confession, and they beat him into confessing to this crime, then the appellate court can say, you know what, they shouldn't have done that, and we're going to give this guy a new trial, and you can't use that confession in the trial because it shouldn't have been in there in the first place. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the appellate court. Then if you lose in the appellate court, if the Court of Appeals says, no, sorry, everything's fine, everything's going to stay the way it is, you can say then, I'm not going to stop there, I'm going to file an appeal with the Supreme Court. That's the Supreme Court of the state of Utah, okay? Not the United States Supreme Court, but just the Supreme Court here in Utah. Does anybody know how many judges are on our Supreme Court here in Utah?
17.
Nope, less.
7. 8.
Less than 8.
About 9.
More than 2.
5.
5. Who said 5? Yay, there we go. There's 5. All right, so there's 5 judges on the Supreme Court in the state of Utah, okay? And they're the highest court in the state. So if you want to take your appeal all the way up to the top, to the people who are the most important in the state of Utah, you go to the Supreme Court. And they can say, you know, either everything's going to stay the way it is or we're going to give you a new shot. Okay? So those are the Utah courts. And this is just kind of a chart that shows you where it goes. So the justice courts and municipal courts. Municipal just means city. So these are city courts and justice courts. They go up to, this superior court is the same thing as a district court. And then up to the Court of Appeals and then up to the Supreme Court. Okay? So in the State versus Samuel Snow, which is your mock trial case, raise your hand if you've read the script so far. Have you read the script for Samuel Snow? You guys. Okay. So if Samuel Snow is found guilty of his murder charge at his trial, and he wanted to appeal it, where would he appeal to? In Utah. Yeah, the appellate court. That's right. So he would appeal to the appellate court. And if he lost at the appellate court, where would he appeal to next? The Supreme Court. That's right, to the Utah Supreme Court. All right, so if we leave Utah and we go to the entire United States of America, we're talking about our federal court system. Okay? Utah is the state court system, and the United States is the federal court system. So the federal courts hear cases where the United States is a party. Does anybody know what being a party to a case means? Okay, what it means is that you're one of the people who's either initiating the charge, who's the first person in the case, or who's the second person in the case. So in the state of Utah versus Samuel Snow, the state of Utah is a party, and Samuel Snow is a party. If I get, what's your name in the Batman sweatshirt? Anthony? If I get in a car accident with Anthony, and I want to sue Anthony for the damage that he did to my car, I, Anna Anderson, would be the plaintiff party in that case, and Anthony would be the defendant party in that case. Okay? Anna versus Anthony. Whoever's on either side of that versus are the parties in the case, okay? So in the federal courts, they don't really handle a lot of like stolen car cases or retail theft cases. They don't handle those cases. They handle questions that are nationwide. So people who are violating the Constitution for not letting someone have their right to free speech, or crimes that occur on federal land, like in the national parks, when people are vandalizing rocks in the national parks, or crimes that happen in more than one state, like when there's a human trafficking case, where there's someone who is taking women from California and trafficking them for sex-related purposes in Utah. That is a case that would be in federal court because it crosses state lines, okay? And these are the number of federal courts. So there's 94 district courts in the United States, 13 courts of appeals, and 1 Supreme Court for the whole United States. And this map kind of shows you where those are, okay? So these different colors are the different districts. And so this is ours. Utah and Wyoming and Colorado and Kansas and Oklahoma and New Mexico are all in the 10th District Court of Appeals for the United States. And so there's all these different districts, and that's kind of how they're broken up, okay? So we're going to talk about a couple of cases today, and we're going to talk about one really old case and then one really new case, all right? Who can tell me who those people are on the screen? If you know this, it's going to be super impressive. No, no, it's not Rosa Parks. That is Oliver Brown and his daughter, Linda Brown. All right? Has anyone heard of the case Brown versus the Board of Education before? Have you guys talked about that in class, Mr. Jones?
Are you getting it?
Okay. So Brown versus Board of Education is a Supreme Court case in the United States, but it didn't start out that way. It started in Kansas, all right? In the state of Kansas in 1951, so what is that? Almost 70 years ago. There was a group of parents of black children who were fed up because their black kids were having to go to schools that were not close to their houses. Because at that time, it was still okay for there to be white schools and black schools. Okay? So the white kids would go to one school, and the black kids would go to another school. And the schools were not equal. All right? The schools for the white kids were way better. And so Linda Brown, this little girl, she would have to get up in the morning and walk 6 blocks to a bus stop, and then get on the bus and ride the bus another few miles to go to her school that was only for black children. And there was a white school right across the street from her house. So her dad was one of the people who got involved in this lawsuit against the Kansas Board of Education to say that this was not fair. And does anybody know the term for that when there's schools for different races and they're separate? Is that
Diversity.
Starts with an S? Segregation. That's exactly right. The schools were segregated. So he was suing along with these 13 other parents to end segregation in the state of Kansas so that his kid could go to the school that was closer to their house. Seems fair, right? So they sued the state of Kansas. And in that level, that basic level, they were suing in the district court. What do you think happened in the district court? Do you think that the district court said, you know what, you're right, Mr. Brown, you win? Or do you think that they said the school district wins?
Mr. Brown.
School. They said the school district wins. They agreed with the school district, and they said that these schools could be segregated because the black schools were just as good as the white schools, which was not true. But regardless, that was what they said. That it's totally fine to have these different race kids in their separate schools as long as the schools were just as good as each other and nobody was at an advantage by going to one school or another. So what happened is that Mr. Brown and all these other parents joined with parents from 4 other states, from South Carolina, from Delaware, from a couple of other states that all have these lawsuits going on. And because they joined together like that, they got to skip the appellate court level and they went straight to the United States Supreme Court. And they asked the United States Supreme Court to hear their case, arguing that their kids should be able to go to whatever school was in their district, whatever school was closest, and it shouldn't matter what their race was, or how good the school was, or whatever the case may be. So what do you think happened when they went to the Supreme Court? Do you think the Supreme Court said, Mr. Brown, you win? Or do you think they said, schools, you win?
Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown. This time it was Mr. Brown. So this decision in Brown versus Board of Education, let me just make sure what year it came down. I don't have that written down. I think it was in 1954.
Yeah.
But I might have it on a slide here.
That's what I did.
Okay, I don't have it. But the Supreme Court voted, and they said that segregation is harmful and it's unconstitutional, okay? Which means it goes against the Constitution of the United States, where all people are supposed to be treated equal. And they said that it could not happen anymore. And I think it was in 1954. I'd have to look that up to be sure. But this is the case, you guys. This is the most important case for you as students in the history of the United States of America. Because without this case, you all wouldn't be sitting here together. And I think that sometimes you don't really understand the importance of that because you're young and you don't really care when you're in 8th grade about these things that happened so long ago. But can you imagine being in a place where you still had to go to a school and where you went to school depended on what your race was? Not anything else. Just if you are a black kid or a brown kid or a white kid, you're going to go to the black school or the brown school or the white school. I just can't even imagine that. And believe it or not, this happened way before I was born too. I know you probably don't believe that. But even when I was going to school, I had a lot of different races in my school. And we learned about this, and it's just crazy to think that it was ever any different, but it was. But it's also really encouraging that when that says 9-0, there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court of the United States, and this decision was unanimous. They all agreed, which doesn't happen very often, but they all agreed that segregation is harmful and unconstitutional. And so since that happened, this is the way that it's been. And I'm sure you've seen news stories, old news stories about when the schools were starting to desegregate, and it wasn't an easy road for those kids. The first black kid to go to a white school in Alabama or a non-segregated school in Alabama, when they're spit at and things are thrown at them and they're treated terribly, that's how that went for a really, really, really long time. But because of this decision and because of those steps that people took over the next decades, you guys are where you are, where you don't have to worry about that stuff happening anymore. So this case was maybe the most important case in the history of education in the United States. So does anybody have any questions about that case or anything they want to say? Okay. The next case we want to talk about, and we're going to move on from the issue of people of color and racism and whatnot. We're going to switch. And let me ask you guys a question. Has anybody heard of this case, Masterpiece Cake? Nope. Does anybody in this room have a relative or a good friend or someone that they know and that they care about who is homosexual, who's gay? Raise your hand. Okay. A lot of you. And I do too. My sister is gay. She's married to a woman. Okay? And this decision, this case, is maybe one of the more important cases that's come across lately when it comes to gay rights. But it didn't actually start that way. So what this is, let me show you this picture. So this is the couple that's involved in this case, okay? These people's names, and I don't want to get them wrong, are Charlie Craig and David Mullins. And they're a couple, they live in Colorado. They've been together for years and years and years. And in 2012, they went to Massachusetts to get married, all right? Because it wasn't legal in Colorado at the time. You guys all know that gay marriage is legal now, right? That the Supreme Court said that it's legal. So yeah, so anybody can get married who wants to, who's in a homosexual relationship. So these two guys got married in Massachusetts because it wasn't legal in Colorado at the time. And they wanted to have a party when they got back to Colorado for all their family and friends to come, a wedding reception in Colorado. So they went to a cake shop, to a Masterpiece Cake Shop, and they met this guy. This is Jack Phillips. So Jack Phillips was the baker at Masterpiece Cake Shop. It was his shop. He owned it, and he ran it. And when he found out that they wanted a wedding cake made, he refused to do it because they're gay, and he is Christian, and it was against his particular beliefs to make a cake for a gay wedding because he didn't. What's that? Essentially, he's not homophobic per se. He said that he had made cakes for gay couples before, but not for a wedding ceremony. So it wasn't that he had a problem with Mr. Mullins and Mr. Craig, just because they were gay, but he had a problem with the fact that they wanted him to make a wedding cake because he did not believe that two men should be able to get married. Okay, so he refused to make their cake. So one of the guys, one of the couple, went back to, told his parents about it. We were just in a conversation the next day. Said, hey, this guy, we went to get a cake made yesterday. He wouldn't even make our cake because we're gay. And so that guy's mom called Mr. Phillips and talked to him, and he said, I can't do it. I'm sorry, it's against my religion. And so they sued him. They sued him for discriminating against them based on their sexuality.
Religion.
Which is not allowed under the Constitution. So you know how when you go to like a regular shop, like if those two guys, if Mr. Mullins and Mr. Craig were to go to Walmart, and the Walmart clerk was like, I'm not selling you this stuff because you're gay, that's not allowed. They can't do that. But you're right. He was saying that Mr. Phillips was saying it was because of his religion, whoever said that back there. It wasn't because, was that you? It wasn't because they were gay. It was because of Mr. Phillips' religion and his deeply held beliefs. So they went to court, and the district court case, who do you think won at the district court level, the very beginning? So what actually happened is that, let me give you a little bit more background here. So Mr. Mullins and Mr. Craig sued Mr. Phillips, and the Colorado Commission of Human Rights, of Civil Rights, ruled in their favor and said, hey, Mr. Phillips, you've got to make these guys their cake. You can't do this. You're discriminating against them. So Mr. Phillips then sued the state of Colorado, all right? And so that's where that court case started. So it's Phillips versus the state of Colorado. So what do you think happened at the district court level?
The gay.
What's that? Well, sorry, let me back up a little bit. So the couple, Mr. Craig and Mr. Mullins, sued at the district court level, and they won. And so now we're at the Court of Appeals. So let's get there. The Court of Appeals. What do you think happened at the Court of Appeals when Mr. Mullins said, can you reconsider this decision? Who do you think won there?
Mr. Phillips.
The commission.
It was a commission. Yeah, the state of Colorado won at the appellate level. Okay? So they took it back up to the Supreme Court because now there's two different courts that have said different things. And the Supreme Court case, the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission, went to the Supreme Court of the United States. And so when these cases go to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court they get thousands and thousands and thousands of cases sent to them every year, with people saying, will you please hear my case? Will you please reconsider this case? Will you please listen to me? And they have to pick the ones that they want to address. And what that's called is granting certiorari. And so it just, for short, you can say granting cert, C-E-R-T. And so the Supreme Court of the United States granted cert to this case to address it. And then when they do that, you, as just a person, any citizen of the United States, can file a brief, like essentially send the Supreme Court a letter that says, you know, this is who I am, this is how I feel about this is why you should decide this case this way. And they usually get, you know, a dozen or so of those on any particular issue. On this case, they got 300 of them from different organizations saying, you know, you need to decide this case this way and whatnot. So they read all those briefs, they listened to all the arguments, the Baker came to court, the state of Colorado came to court, and they made all their arguments. And what do you think happened at the Supreme Court?
Mr. Phillips won.
What'd you say? You said Mr. Phillips won? He did win. Mr. Phillips wins. Does anybody know why Mr. Phillips won?
Because you can't control somebody's beliefs.
Okay, he said because you can't control somebody's beliefs. That is not why he won. He won this case because the Supreme Court said that the state of Colorado, when they ruled against him down in Colorado, that they were essentially rude to him. That they compared him to Hitler, that they compared his religion to the Holocaust, and that the commission in their decision in Colorado treated Mr. Phillips badly, and that they shouldn't have done that. So they ruled in his favor and said that he wins that case, he doesn't have to bake the cake for now. But they didn't rule on the issue of religion at all. They didn't really even talk about it, because that wasn't the issue that he took up to them. So what we have going on now, we have another case going on now with the same baker, who Mr. Phillips this was just in August of this year, I believe, August of 2018. He, let me just make sure I took a note on that. Yep, just this year, in the summer of 2018, Mr. Phillips declined or refused to bake a cake for a transgendered woman who wanted a cake to celebrate her surgery when she underwent her surgery to become a woman. And he refused to bake that cake. So now that case is on its way to the Supreme Court. And that case is actually going to address whether Mr. Phillips has the right to refuse to do these things for people because it goes against his religious beliefs. So we're all waiting to see if the Supreme Court grants that case cert, to see if they're going to hear it so that they can rule on that, and then we'll all know where that law stands. Because once the Supreme Court rules on something, it's pretty hard to get them to change it again in the future. So that's where we are on those two cases. Does anybody have any questions about the cake baker case? Okay. So let's see here. It's 7 after, so that gives us about 13 minutes before we have to head downstairs.
Yeah.
So Mr. Jones wanted me to just go over a couple more things with you guys about the mock trial, especially for those of you who weren't at the Justice Court tours. And again, the main thing I want to tell you guys as far as your performances go, and from what I understand, you're doing your in-class performances next Monday and Tuesday. And so I'm going to try to come over and see some of those when I get done in court in the morning and the afternoon, but I don't know if I'll be able to make it for all of them or some of them or none of them, depending on how the day goes. But I'm going to try to come watch them. So what I want to remind you guys to do is to talk really, really, really loudly, okay? Because if I do come in, you'll be up here. I'm assuming if it goes like it did last year, you'll be up here, and I'll probably just sneak in the back and sit in a chair in the back. And I want to be able to hear you guys when you're talking, and I don't think you're going to have microphones, or even if you do, talk as loudly as you can without yelling. I talk really loud all the time and really fast. But when you're doing a part in a play like you guys essentially are, it's easy to, like I said before, hold your papers in front of your face or mumble a lot or speak really quietly. And the main thing that I need you to do, especially if you want to be in that final performance on November 30th, is get used to talking really, really loud so that I can hear you in the back of this room and that if you come to court to do the performance in court, that we can hear you in the back of that room too. Because you'll have parents there, you'll have friends there, you'll have me there, you'll have other judges there. Everybody's going to come to watch this thing if it goes like it did last year. And if you're in the back of the courtroom, it can be really hard to hear you guys who are at the front, okay? Does anybody have any questions about the mock trial as it's been going on? You guys. Okay, let me ask you some questions. Who in here is going to be Samuel Snow? Is anybody? Has anybody been assigned the role? You're Samuel Snow? Okay, just one of you?
Well, there's 2 classes. I'm not sure
Yeah.
about the other class.
No, we're finishing up assignments.
Oh, so you're doing assignments right now? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe not everybody knows what their roles are. Has anybody told Mr. Jones or Ms. Maharis that you all want to participate in the final mock trial? Yeah? Raise your hand if you want to participate in the final performance. Oh, awesome. Okay, good. So you guys, any of you that just raised your hand, and any of you that are just considering it, let Mr. Jones or Ms. Maharis know, okay? Because if you want to do that, we're going to figure out a way to make that happen for as many of you as we can. If we need to add parts or add jurors or whatever the case may be, okay? Mr. Jones, do you have anything that you want to go over?